In 1945, on the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima, a 23-year-old Marine was doing something that every military expert said was suicide. Jack Mercer stood in the open bullets, snapping past his head like angry hornets, holding a weapon that no officer had authorized him to carry. A weapon that didn't exist in any field manual. A weapon built from garbage. They called it junk. They said it would never work. They ordered him to throw it away. But in the next 60 seconds, that junk would destroy 5 concrete bunkers. The same bunkers that 3 days of naval bombardment couldn't touch. The same bunkers that were killing his friends. This is the story of how American trash became a lifesaver. How a toolmaker from Ohio ignored every rule in the book and saved 200 lives. How one man with a welding torch proved that sometimes the best solution isn't the one they give you. It's the one you build yourself. But to understand how Jack Mercer ended up on that beach holding an impossible weapon, you need to go back 3 months. To a junkyard in Hawaii. To a moment when a young Marine looked at a pile of twisted metal and saw something nobody else could see. He saw hope. November 1944, Naval Air Station, Hawaii. The morning sun beat down on a scrapyard filled with the corpses of aircraft, wrecked fighters, blown apart bombers, the metal graveyard of the Pacific War. Jack Mercer walked through the debris with the careful eye of a man who had spent his whole life working with metal. He wasn't looking for souvenirs. He was looking for a solution to a problem that hadn't killed him yet, but probably would soon. The rumors were flying through the barracks like tracer rounds. The next target wasn't going to be another jungle island. It was going to be a fortress. A rock that the Japanese had spent 20 years turning into a concrete nightmare. And the standard weapons, the M1 Garand rifle and the Browning automatic rifle, weren't going to cut it. Not against 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Not against bunkers designed to withstand naval artillery. Jack needed something heavier. Something faster. Something that didn't exist in the United States arsenal. He stopped walking when he saw the tail section of a Douglas Dauntless dive bomber. The plane had been shot to pieces. Just a skeleton of aluminum and steel resting in the weeds like the bones of a dead animal. But Jack wasn't interested in the fuselage. He was interested in what was mounted inside the wing. It was an AN/M2 Browning .3 0-caliber machine gun. To an untrained eye, it looked similar to the M1919 Browning that infantry units used. Same ammunition, same basic design. But Jack knew the difference. He had spent enough time in the armory to know that the devil was in the details. The ground version of the Browning was built like a tractor. Heavy, reliable, slow. It fired about 500 rounds per minute. You could control it, you could aim it, you could count the individual shots. Thap, 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 thap. A steady, predictable rhythm. But the aircraft version was different. It was built for speed. The barrel was thinner to save weight. The receiver was skeletonized. The entire mechanism was tuned to fire as fast as mechanically possible because a fighter plane only has a split second to hit a target while screaming through the sky at 300 miles per hour. This gun fired 1,200 rounds per minute. That's 20 bullets every single second. That's not a rhythm. That's a scream. Jack pulled the gun from the wreckage. It was covered in hydraulic fluid and grime. It smelled like burnt oil and old grease. It didn't have a shoulder stock. It didn't even have a trigger you could pull with your finger. It was designed to be fired electrically by a button on the pilot's control stick. It was a piece of industrial machinery. Not a soldier's weapon, but Jack looked at it and saw potential. He saw what it could be. He had learned that way of seeing from his father. William Mercer had worked in the steel mills of Youngstown, Ohio for 30 years. He had taught his son a simple principle. If the tool doesn't exist, create it. If the machine is broken, fix it. If they tell you it can't be done, prove them wrong. William had died 2 years earlier in 1942. Complications from a fall at the mill. His last words to Jack had been simple. Don't let these hands retire. Do something that matters. 3 months later, Jack had joined the Marines. Not because he hated the Japanese, not because of some burning patriotic fever. He joined because his father had asked him to do something meaningful, and fixing trucks in Youngstown wasn't going to cut it anymore. Now standing in that Hawaiian scrapyard with a 23-pound aircraft gun in his hands, Jack understood what his father had meant. This war was going to be won by men who could solve problems. Men who could look at the impossible and make it work. The question was whether Jack could turn this piece of airplane scrap into something that would keep his friends alive. He tucked the gun under his arm and headed back to the machine shop. The other Marines looked at him like he'd lost his mind. The machine shop at the base was a long metal building that smelled like cutting oil and hot metal. It was late at night when Jack brought the AN/M2 inside. He wasn't alone. He had 5 other men with him. Men he trusted, men who understood what was coming. Danny Kowalski was from Boston, 25 years old Polish immigrant family, former auto mechanic. He had the kind of face that always looked like it was about to tell a joke. He chain-smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes and talked too much, but he could strip an engine blindfolded. When Jack showed him the aircraft gun, Danny just laughed. "Jack, that's a machine gun for an airplane. You planning to grow wings?" "It fires 1,200 rounds a minute," Jack said. "That's double the bar, triple the M1919. And it'll kick like a mule on fire. How are you planning to hold it?" "We're going to fabricate a stock. Take it from an M1 Garand." That's when Frank Sullivan spoke up. Everyone called him Red because of his hair. He was from Texas, a former ranch hand who had grown up breaking horses and shooting coyotes. Red didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. "If Jack says it'll work, I believe him." The third man was Marcus Washington, 24 years old, black, from Chicago. He had worked as a welder in the shipyards before the war, building Liberty ships that carried supplies across the Atlantic. Marcus was careful and skeptical by nature. He looked at the aircraft gun with narrowed eyes. "Even if we can mount a stock, that thing fires electrically. How are you going to make a trigger?" "We'll fabricate one," said Pete Donnelly. He was the youngest of the group, 21, from New York. His father had been a gunsmith, and Pete had inherited the knowledge. He was already examining the solenoid mechanism, turning it over in his hands. "We rip out the electric solenoid and build a mechanical trigger from scratch. It's possible." The oldest man in the group was Henry Chen, 26, Chinese-American, from San Francisco. His family had been sent to an internment camp in 1942, but Henry had volunteered for the Marines anyway. He was an electrician by trade, and he understood the mathematics of mechanisms. He was already doing calculations in his head. "Rate of fire that high, you'll burn through 100 rounds in 5 seconds. The gun will overheat and melt." "Then we don't fire continuously," Jack said. "We fire in bursts, 3 seconds. Cool for 1. 3 seconds. Cool for 1. That's still a lot of ammunition." "Then we'll carry more." Danny grinned in. "You're talking about building a gun that doesn't exist, without permission. If we get caught, they'll court-martial us." "If we don't build it," Jack said quietly, "we'll die on the next beach." The 5 men looked at each other. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Red nodded. "Let's get to work." They worked at night, after duty hours, when the officers weren't around. They worked in secret like criminals because technically that's what they were. Modifying weapons without authorization was a violation of military regulations. If they were caught, the best-case scenario was the brig. The worst case was a dishonorable discharge. But these men had heard the same rumors Jack had heard. They knew where they were going. They knew that Iwo Jima wasn't going to be like Guadalcanal or Tarawa. This was going to be different. This was going to be a fortress. Standard equipment wasn't going to cut it. The first night, Marcus welded the wooden stock from an M1 Garand rifle to the rear of the aircraft gun's receiver. The welding torch hissed and spat blue-white sparks that lit up the dark workshop like lightning. The smell of burning metal filled the air, ozone and heated steel. When Marcus lifted his welding mask, there was a rough seam of metal holding the stock in place. "It's ugly," Marcus said. "It doesn't need to be pretty," Jack replied. "It needs to work." The second night, Pete fabricated a mechanical trigger. He scavenged steel from a broken toolbox and spent hours filing and shaping it by hand. He tested the spring tension 47 times before he got it right. When he finally pulled the trigger and heard the satisfying click of the mechanism engaging, all 6 men grinned. The third night, Danny built the box magazine. The aircraft gun was designed to be belt-fed from an ammunition box inside the wing, but Jack needed something portable. Danny cut and shaped aluminum from old ration crates, creating a rectangular box that could hold 100 rounds of .30 caliber ammunition in a belt-fed configuration. He tested the feed mechanism a dozen times. It worked perfectly. The fourth night, Henry removed the electrical solenoid and helped Pete integrate the mechanical trigger. He did the math on paper, calculating the exact timing needed to achieve 1,200 rounds per minute with a manual mechanism. The numbers worked. Barely. By the fifth night, they had a working prototype. Jack assembled all the pieces: the M1 Garand stock, the mechanical trigger, the belt-fed box magazine, the bipod they had stolen from a Browning automatic rifle and welded to the barrel shroud. It was the ugliest weapon any of them had ever seen. It looked like three different guns had been in a car accident and fused together. But when Jack lifted it, felt the weight of it, tested the trigger, he smiled. Red looked at the gun and said one word: Stinger. What? That's what we should call it, because it's going to sting like hell. The name stuck. They built 5 more of them over the next 2 weeks. One for each man, 6 stingers, 6 weapons that didn't exist in any armory in the world. They were ready to test them. The firing range was 10 miles from the main base. They went at dawn when nobody else was around. The morning air was cool and damp. Mist hung over the valley. They set up a wooden target at 50 yards. Jack loaded the first stinger. 100 rounds in the box magazine. He checked the action, seated the weapon against his shoulder, planted his feet in the dirt, wrapped his finger around the homemade trigger. He had no idea if it would work, no idea if the welded stock would hold, no idea if the trigger mechanism would engage properly. For all he knew, the gun would explode in his hands. But his father's voice echoed in his head. Do something that matters. Jack pulled the trigger. The sound was terrifying. It wasn't the thap, thap, thap of an M1919. It wasn't the bang, bang, bang of a BAR. This was something else entirely. It was a roar, a continuous ripping sound like a giant sheet of canvas being torn in half by an angry god. The noise didn't even sound like individual shots. It sounded like a single sustained scream of violence. The recoil slammed into Jack's shoulder like a freight train. He staggered back 2 steps, boots sliding in the dirt. But he kept his grip, kept the weapon level, kept the trigger depressed. 20 bullets per second hammered downrange. The stream of tracer rounds looked like a solid red line connecting the barrel to the target. The wooden target didn't just get holes in it, it disintegrated. The sheer volume of lead hitting the wood turned it into sawdust in the blink of an eye. Splinters exploded into the air. The target post snapped and fell over. Jack let off the trigger after 5 seconds. 100 rounds gone. The barrel was glowing cherry red. Smoke curled from the receiver. The metal was so hot, he could feel the heat radiating through his gloves. He turned around and looked at his friends. Danny's mouth was hanging open. Holy Mother of God! Marcus shook his head slowly. That's not a gun. That's a chainsaw with bullets. Pete was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Did you see that? Did you see what it did? Henry, always the quiet one, just nodded. It works. Red walked over to Jack. He was smiling. It was the first time Jack had seen him smile in 3 months. Beautiful. They tested all 6 stingers that morning. Every one of them worked. Every one of them turned wooden targets into dust. They were loud. They were violent. They ate ammunition like a starving animal. But they worked. For the first time since hearing the rumors about Iwo Jima, Jack felt like they had a chance. 3 days later, Lieutenant Harrison found out. Harrison was the unit's weapons officer, a West Point graduate, by the book. He believed in regulations the way some men believe in God. When he walked into the machine shop and saw 6 homemade guns laid out on the workbench, his face went red. What the hell is this? Jack stood at attention. Modified weaponry, sir, for enhanced fire support. These are unauthorized firearms. Violations of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Where did you get the components? Scrapyard, sir. You built weapons from garbage without clearance, without testing, without approval. Harrison picked up one of the stingers and examined it with disgust. If one of these malfunctions and kills a Marine, I'm responsible. If one of these blows up in your hands, I have to explain to your mother why her son died from his own stupidity. Do you understand that, Corporal? Yes, sir. Then you understand why I'm ordering you to surrender these immediately. Danny started to speak. Sir, if you would just let us demonstrate. Quiet, Kowalski. Harrison's voice was cold. This is not a debate. These weapons are dangerous, untested, illegal. You will surrender them to the armory. That is an order. Jack looked at his friends. Red's jaw was clenched. Marcus looked angry. Pete looked like he might cry. Henry's face was unreadable. Jack looked back at Harriman. Yes, sir, we'll surrender them. That night in the barracks, the 6 men gathered in the corner farthest from the door. They spoke in whispers. So that's it, Pete said. We just give up. We don't have a choice, Marcus said. Harrison gave us a direct order. Harrison's never been in combat, Danny muttered. He doesn't know what it's like when standard equipment isn't enough. Red looked at Jack. What do you want to do? Jack thought about his father, about doing something that mattered, about the beach they were going to hit, about the concrete bunkers waiting for them, and about the friends who were going to die if they didn't have an edge. We built 6 Stingers, Jack said slowly. Harrison ordered us to surrender them. Right, Pete said. So we hand them over. We hand them over, Jack agreed. He paused. Then he smiled. We hand over 1. Danny's eyes went wide. You sneaky son of a bitch. We each hide 1 in our personal gear. When we load onto the transports, we bring them with us. If we get caught, only I take the blame. I'll say I forced you to help me. You all tried to stop me. That's the story. And if we don't get caught, Marcus asked, then we have a fighting chance. The 5 men looked at each other. Then one by one they nodded. The next morning they formally surrendered 1 Stinger to Lieutenant Harrison. He logged it, locked it in the armory, told them he was disappointed in their judgment but appreciated their compliance. 5 Stingers remained hidden, wrapped in canvas, tucked into duffel bags, waiting. February 17, 1945. The Marines loaded onto transport ships in Hawaii. Destination Iwo Jima, a volcanic island 8 square miles of black sand and sulfur, 750 miles from Tokyo. The Navy had been pounding the island for 3 days. Battleships with 14-inch guns, bombers dropping tons of high explosives. The island looked like the surface of the moon. Smoking, cratered, dead. The admiral made an announcement over the ship's loudspeaker. 3 days of bombardment have neutralized enemy resistance. This will be one of the shortest operations in Marine Corps history. Jack sat in the transport hold with his Stinger on his lap. He was cleaning the barrel with an oiled rag. Red sat next to him doing the same. Danny was across from them, humming a song. Marcus was sharpening his knife. Pete was writing a letter he probably wouldn't send. Henry was reading. You think the Admiral's right? Red asked quietly. You think they're all dead? Jack looked out through the porthole at the island in the distance. It was dark, quiet, smoking from the bombardment. But something felt wrong. It was too quiet. No, Jack said. They're not dead. They're waiting. Red nodded. He had learned to trust Jack's instincts. The ship moved closer to the island. The smell reached them even from miles offshore. Sulfur, rotten eggs, the volcanic vents were still active, pumping poison gas into the air. That night, the Marines tried to sleep. Most couldn't. They wrote letters, they cleaned weapons, they prayed. Jack took out a piece of paper and started writing. Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll get this letter, but I need to write it. I've done good work with these hands, just like Dad taught me. I built a tool, and that tool has saved my friends. Danny and Marcus are good men. You would like them. If I don't come home, please know that I died doing something that mattered. Love, Jack. He folded the letter, put it in his pocket. Didn't send it, Red noticed. You planning to mail that tomorrow? Don't wait until tomorrow, Jack. That's superstitious. Maybe, but tomorrow we hit the beach, and I have a bad feeling about what's waiting for us. Jack looked at his friend, at the Stinger lying across his knees, at the other 4 men sleeping nearby. His brothers, his team, the only family that mattered right now. Whatever's waiting, Jack said. We'll handle it. We've got the Stingers. And if the Stingers aren't enough, Jack didn't answer, because he didn't have an answer. All he had was a homemade gun, a lot of ammunition, and the faint hope that American ingenuity could beat Japanese concrete. Dawn came too fast. February 19th, 1945. D-Day. Iwo Jima. The landing craft hit the water at 0900 hours. Jack and his squad were in the same LVT, the tracked amphibious vehicle that would carry them to the beach. The door was closed. It was dark inside. 30 Marines packed together rifles between their knees, trying not to think about what was coming. Jack held the Stinger across his lap. He had wrapped it in canvas to keep the sand out. He had 300 rounds of ammunition strapped across his chest in bandoliers. He looked like a Mexican bandit from an old Western. The other Marines looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. One of them, a kid who looked about 19, pointed at the Stinger. "What the hell is that insurance?" Jack said. The LVT's engine roared. The vehicle lurched forward, climbing over the waves toward the black beach. Through the small vision slits, Jack could see the island getting closer. It was dark, volcanic, unnatural, like something from another planet. The naval bombardment had stopped. The island was silent. That silence was terrifying. Danny was next to Jack, smoking a cigarette, even though it was against regulations in the LVT. His hands were shaking slightly. "You scared?" Danny asked. "Yeah," Jack said. "Good, me too. Means we're not stupid." The LVT hit the beach. The ramp started to drop. Light flooded in. The smell of sulfur hit them like a punch to the face. "Go! Go! Go!" the sergeant yelled. The first 3 Marines ran out, and the world turned into hell. The machine guns opened up from invisible positions on the hillside. The sound was distinctive, not the American guns. Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns. They called them woodpeckers because of the slow rhythmic sound. Thap, thap, thap. The first Marine made it 5 steps before he fell. The second made it 3. The third didn't even clear the ramp. Jack ran out into chaos. His boots hit the black sand and immediately sank. This wasn't normal beach sand. It was volcanic ash. Fine. Loose. It swallowed his feet up to the ankles. Like running through loose wheat. Every step was a struggle. Bullets snapped through the air. Mortar rounds exploded in the surf. Men were screaming. The beach was a nightmare of black sand, white foam, red blood, and the constant hammering of machine gun fire. Jack's squad made it 50 yards before they were pinned down. They dove behind a small ridge of volcanic ash, the only cover available. Bullets snapped overhead. Men were dying. The medic was screaming for help. Ahead of them, maybe 50 yards up the slope, was a Japanese pillbox, a low concrete dome with a narrow firing slit. Inside, a Type 92 machine gun was hammering away. Its slow, steady rhythm was killing Marines like clockwork. Thap, thap, thap. The Marines tried to fight back. They fired their M1 Garands. The bullets sparked uselessly off the concrete. They tried the BARs. The slower rate of fire meant the Japanese gunners could duck between bursts. Nothing worked. They were stuck, pinned, dying. Jack looked at his friends. Danny was pressed against the sand, eyes wide. Marcus was trying to return fire with his rifle, cursing, when the bullets bounced off. Red was calm, calculating, looking for an angle. Pete was pale. Henry was methodical, counting the rhythm of the enemy gun. They were going to die here. All of them. Unless someone did something. Jack looked at the Stinger, the weapon that every expert said was impossible. The weapon that Lieutenant Harrison had called garbage. The weapon that was built from airplane parts in a Hawaiian scrapyard. He remembered his father's voice. Do something that matters. Jack unwrapped the canvas, checked the action, loaded the 100-round box magazine, racked the charging handle. The mechanism felt smooth, heavy, ready. Everyone around him was shouting for him to stay down, to wait for a bazooka team, to wait for support. But the bazooka man was dead, floating face down in the surf. And support wasn't coming. Jack Mercer stood up. He stepped out from behind the ridge, boots sinking in the black sand. The Stinger cradled in his arms. The Japanese gunners saw him immediately. They swiveled their Type 92 toward this lone American standing in the open. They thought it would be easy. They thought they had superior firepower. They were wrong. Jack planted his feet, tucked the stock into his shoulder, aimed at the pillbox, and pulled the trigger. The Stinger screamed, a sound like tearing metal mixed with thunder. 20 bullets per second hammered into the concrete bunker. The stream of tracer rounds looked like a red laser connecting Jack to the pillbox. The sandbags around the firing slit didn't just get holes. They evaporated, turned to dust by the sheer volume of metal hitting them. Jack held the trigger for 3 seconds. 60 rounds, More bullets than a rifleman fires in an entire firefight, all delivered in the time it takes to blink. The Japanese machine gun fell silent. Jack let off the trigger. The barrel of the Stinger was already smoking, the metal glowing dull red. He didn't wait to admire his work. He pulled a grenade from his belt, threw it through the now shredded firing slit. It exploded with a muffled thump inside the concrete box. Pillbox number 1 was dead. Jack turned to his right. Another pillbox 50 yards away was chewing up his squad. He swiveled the Stinger. The gun roared again like a buzzsaw cutting through steel. Another 3-second burst. Another 60 rounds. Another pillbox silenced. The Marines who had been pinned down were staring at him with their mouths open. They had never seen anything like this. Never heard anything like this. This wasn't a machine gun. This was something from another world. Danny started laughing, not from humor, from shock, from relief, from the sheer absurdity of watching one man with a homemade weapon do what a platoon couldn't. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "It works." But then Jack heard the sound every machine gunner dreads, the click of an empty chamber. 100 rounds gone in 6 seconds of firing. The Stinger was hungry, and Jack was standing in the open with an empty gun while more Japanese positions opened fire. He had a choice: wait for someone to bring him ammunition, or handle it himself. Jack took off his helmet, threw it on the black sand to mark his position, turned around, and ran back toward the beach, back toward the landing craft, back through the kill zone. 200 yards, under fire, to get more ammunition, because nobody was going to save him. He had to save himself. Jack ran through hell. The black volcanic sand sucked at his boots with every step. It was like running through mud, except the mud was hot and filled with razor-sharp fragments of obsidian. Behind him, the battle raged. In front of him, 200 yards of open beach separated him from the ammunition he needed. Mortar rounds exploded in the surf, throwing up geysers of black sand and white foam. Bullets snapped past his head. He heard them crack the air, felt the pressure wave as they missed him by inches. Men were screaming. The wounded were calling for medics. The dead were silent. Jack focused on running, one foot in front of the other, breathing hard, lungs burning from the sulfur fumes. His boots were already full of sand, each one weighing an extra 5 pounds. But he couldn't stop. If he stopped, he died. If he died, his friends died. He reached the landing craft at the water's edge. The ramp was still down. Inside, stacks of ammunition crates sat in the cargo area. Nobody was guarding them. The Navy crew had retreated deeper into the vessel to escape the incoming fire. Jack grabbed 2 belts of .30 caliber ammunition. Each belt held 100 rounds and weighed about 7 pounds. He draped them across his shoulders in an X pattern. Then he grabbed 2 more box magazines for the Stinger. Fully loaded, he was carrying close to 50 pounds of ammunition on top of the 23-pound gun. He turned around and looked back up the beach. The Marines were still pinned down, still dying. His helmet was somewhere up there, marking the spot where he needed to be. Jack started running again, back up the beach, back into the fire. This was run number 1 complete. 7 more to go. This time was harder. The extra weight made every step a struggle. The sand seemed deeper. His legs were already shaking from the adrenaline and exertion. But he kept moving. He had done hard things before. In the steel mills of Youngstown, his father had taught him that the only way to finish a hard job was to keep working until it was done. He made it back to his helmet, dropped behind the small ridge of volcanic ash. His squad was still there, still alive, still fighting with their rifles. They stared at him like he was insane. Red grabbed his shoulder. "You crazy son of a bitch! You just ran the beach twice." Jack didn't answer. He was already reloading the Stinger, hands moving automatically, muscle memory from the hours of practice in Hawaii. He slapped a fresh magazine into place, racked the charging handle. The action cycled smoothly. Pillbox number 3 was 70 yards to the left. It was bigger than the first 2, reinforced with palm logs and buried deep into the hillside. 2 machine guns were firing from it, creating a crossfire that had cut down at least a dozen Marines. Jack stood up, fired. The Stinger unleashed its fury. The continuous roar sounded like 20 hammers striking 20 anvils simultaneously. 3 seconds, 60 rounds. The palm logs splintered like toothpicks. The sandbags disintegrated. One of the Japanese machine guns fell silent, but the second one kept firing. Jack adjusted his aim, fired again, another 3 seconds. The second gun stopped. He pulled a grenade, threw it, watched it arc through the air and disappear into the smoking firing slit. The explosion was muffled by the concrete walls. A small puff of smoke came out of the slit, and then nothing. Pillbox number 3 was done. But the stinger was empty again. Jack looked at his remaining ammunition. 200 rounds left on his person. At this rate, he could take out maybe 2 more pillboxes before he was dry. And there were at least a dozen more bunkers scattered across the hillside. He needed more ammunition, which meant another run. This time Jack didn't hesitate. He dropped his helmet again to mark his position, turned, ran, run number 2. His legs were starting to protest. The muscles in his thighs burned. His lungs felt like they were full of ground glass from breathing the sulfur air. But he made it to the landing craft. Grabbed more ammunition, 2 more belts, 2 more magazines, turned around, ran back. The return trip was agony. Every step was a fight against exhaustion, against pain, against the voice in his head telling him to stop, to rest, to let someone else do it. But there was nobody else. He made it back, loaded the stinger, engaged pillbox number 4. The gun howled like a chainsaw ripping through wet timber. 3 seconds. Empty. Another pillbox destroyed. Run number 3 was when things changed. By now something had broken inside Jack's boots. The leather was so packed with volcanic sand that it felt like he was wearing concrete blocks on his feet. The sand had worked its way inside, grinding against his skin with every step. His feet were bleeding. He could feel the wetness inside his socks. When he made it back to his position after the 3rd ammunition run, Jack sat down in the surf for 30 seconds, right there with bullets splashing the water around him. He untied his boots, kicked them off, threw them away. Danny had followed him down to provide covering fire. He stared at Jack. "Jack, what the hell are you doing?" "Can't run with those things. Too heavy. The ground is covered in sharp rocks and metal. You'll shred your feet." "Already did." Jack stood up. He was wearing just his socks now. The volcanic sand burned through the thin fabric. It felt like walking on hot coals covered in broken glass. But he was lighter, faster. He grabbed the ammunition and ran back up the beach in his socks. The pain was incredible. Every step left a small, bloody footprint in the black sand. But he was moving faster than before. Speed mattered more than pain. Danny stayed with him, firing his rifle at the enemy positions to keep them suppressed while Jack ran. They made it back together. Jack loaded the stinger, took aim at a fortified position that was pinning down another squad to their right. Fired. The weapon screamed like a jet engine at full throttle. 3 seconds. 60 rounds. The position went silent. Run number 4. Run number 5. Each one harder than the last, each one slower. His body was breaking down. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. His hands were shaking. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. Danny was still with him, still covering him, still running beside him when he went for ammunition. On run number 5, as they sprinted back up the beach, Danny suddenly stumbled. Jack heard him grunt, heard him fall, turned. Danny was lying in the black sand. A bullet had caught him in the chest, right over the heart. Jack dropped to his knees beside him. "Danny Corman." But Danny was already gone. The light had left his eyes. He had died instantly. Probably didn't even feel it. Jack knelt there for a moment, just a moment. Then he saw Danny's stinger lying in the sand next to the body. The gun was undamaged. There were still ammunition belts draped across Danny's chest. 200 rounds. "I'm sorry," Jack whispered. He took the ammunition, took the magazines. Danny didn't need them anymore. He stood up and kept running, because stopping wouldn't bring Danny back. The only way to honor him was to make sure his death counted for something. Run number 6. Run number 7. Jack was operating on autopilot now. Muscle memory, pure will. His feet were hamburger. His lungs were on fire. His shoulder was screaming from the recoil, but he kept going. By run number 8, Jack could barely walk. He stumbled down to the landing craft one last time, grabbed the last of the ammunition he could carry, turned to run back. His legs gave out halfway up the beach. He fell into the sand, Lay there for 10 seconds, chest heaving. Thought about staying down, about letting someone else finish it. Then he thought about Danny, about Marcus waiting for him, about the Marines who were still dying because he wasn't there. Jack got up, finished run number 8. When he made it back to his position, Marcus was there with his own stinger. Red and Pete were there too, with satchel charges. "Target's big," Marcus said, pointing at pillbox number 5. The largest bunker complex on the beach. Multiple firing positions, interconnected tunnels. "We do this together." Jack nodded, too exhausted to speak. "On 3, Jack managed. 1, 2, 3. Jack and Marcus stood up together. 2 stingers, 2 streams of tracer fire. Marcus's gun had been through the same hell as Jack's. Earlier in the day, a mortar round had landed close to Marcus's position, sending shrapnel tearing through the air. One piece had gouged a deep score across the receiver of his stinger. Marcus had inspected it, decided it was still functional, and kept fighting. But that crack had weakened the metal. And now as Marcus fired long bursts into the bunker, the stress was too much. The sound was apocalyptic. 40 bullets per second hammered into the concrete structure. 2 firing slits were shredded simultaneously. Sand and concrete dust filled the air. Red and Pete sprinted forward. They reached the bunker, pulled the pins on the satchel charges, threw them through the destroyed firing slits. "Clear," Red shouted. Jack stopped firing, turned to run. Marcus kept firing, 1 second too long. The receiver of his stinger, already weakened by the shrapnel gouge, finally gave way under the immense pressure. The metal split open like a cracked egg. The explosion was small but devastating. Metal fragments tore into Marcus's chest and face. Marcus screamed. The satchel charges detonated 3 seconds later. The entire hillside lifted up and slammed back down. But Jack wasn't watching. He was already running to Marcus. Marcus was on the ground. Blood everywhere. Too much blood. Jack dropped to his knees, tried to apply pressure to the wounds, but there were too many. Marcus was bleeding from a dozen places. "Marcus, stay with me. Corpsman, I need a corpsman." Marcus coughed. Blood came out of his mouth. He tried to speak but couldn't get the words out at first. Jack leaned closer. "It worked," Marcus whispered. His voice was wet, gurgling. "We saved them. You're going to be fine. The medic is coming." "No," Marcus smiled, blood on his teeth. "Tell my daughter. Tell her I fought for what was right. You can tell her yourself. You're going to make it." But Marcus wasn't going to make it. They both knew it. His eyes were already losing focus. The light was fading. Marcus took one more breath, let it out, and was still. Jack knelt there in the black sand, holding his friend's body while the battle raged around him. 2 men dead, Danny and Marcus, 2 of the 6 who had built the stingers, 2 brothers who would never go home. Something inside Jack hardened at that moment, calcified. He had come to this island to save his friends, but he was losing them anyway. The stinger could kill the enemy. It couldn't save the people he cared about. A sergeant appeared beside him, shaking his shoulder. "Mercer, the bunker's down. You did it. You cleared the sector." Jack looked up at him with empty eyes. 2 men are dead." "2 dead, but 200 are alive because of you. We need to keep moving. Can you keep fighting?" Jack looked at the stinger lying in the sand next to Marcus's body. Then he looked at his own stinger still strapped across his back. The barrel was discolored from heat. The stock was cracked, but it still worked. He thought about Danny's last cigarette, about Marcus's daughter who would grow up without a father, about the letter in his pocket that he still hadn't sent to his mother. "Yeah," Jack said, "I can keep fighting." He stood up, picked up the stinger, checked the action. It was damaged but functional. He had maybe 200 rounds of ammunition left, enough for a few more fights. The sun was setting over Iwo Jima. The sky turned the color of a bruise, purple and black and red. The beach behind them was littered with bodies, American bodies. The volcanic sand was stained dark with blood. The smell of death mixed with the sulfur. It was the smell of hell. The Marines were digging in for the night, creating defensive positions in the volcanic ash. It was almost impossible. The sand kept collapsing, but they had to try. The Japanese would counterattack after dark. They always did. Jack found a crater and sat down. His feet were shredded. The socks were completely gone, worn away by the volcanic sand. His feet looked like raw meat. Red and Pete sat down beside him. Henry was there too. 4 men left from the original 6. Nobody spoke for a long time. They just sat there exhausted, covered in black grime and dried blood. Pete was crying quietly. Reddy was staring at nothing. Henry was methodically cleaning his rifle, his face expressionless. Danny was going to open an auto shop when he got home, Pete said finally. In Boston. He had it all planned out. His uncle was going to loan him the money. Marcus had a daughter, Henry added, 2 years old. He'd never met her. She was born while he was in boot camp. Jack pulled the stinger into his lap, started cleaning it with an oily rag. His hands moved automatically. The ritual was calming. Scrape the carbon from the bolt, check the spring tension, oil the moving parts. It was something he could control when everything else was chaos. Red watched him work. That gun is dying, Jack. Look at the barrel. It's warped from the heat. The welds are cracking. It's not going to last much longer. I know. We should request replacement weapons. Standard issue. Standard issue won't do what this does. This killed Marcus. Jack stopped cleaning, looked at Red. Marcus wasn't killed by the stinger. He was killed by war, by shrapnel that weakened his gun. By bad luck, the stinger gave us a fighting chance. Without it, we'd all be dead. Maybe, Red said, but how many more times can you fire it before it explodes on you too? Jack didn't have an answer. He went back to cleaning the gun. Lieutenant Harrison found them an hour later, the same officer who had ordered them to surrender the stingers back in Hawaii. He looked different now. His uniform was dirty. His face was haggard. He had seen combat for the first time today, and it had changed him. He sat down next to Jack without asking permission. Just sat there in the volcanic ash like a regular Marine instead of an officer. They sat in silence for a minute. Mercer, Harrison said finally, I owe you an apology. Sir, back in Hawaii, I called your gun garbage. I ordered you to surrender it. I said it was dangerous and would get men killed. He paused. I was wrong. Sir, 2 of my men are dead. I know, and that's a tragedy, but 200 are alive. I watched you today, Corporal. I saw what you did. 8 times you ran that beach. 8 times you came back with ammunition. You single-handedly broke the Japanese defensive line in this sector. You saved an entire battalion. Jack didn't respond. Saving a battalion didn't feel like much when he couldn't save his friends. Harrison continued, they taught us at West Point that regulations are absolute, that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way, that soldiers who don't follow the rules get people killed. He laughed bitterly, but they didn't teach us what to do when the rules aren't enough. When the enemy has built fortifications that our doctrine can't handle, that's when you need men like you. Men who can improvise. Men who can see solutions that don't exist in the manual. Danny and Marcus helped build these guns, Jack said. They died today. If the stingers were such a good idea, why are they dead? Because war is mathematics, Mercer. You can't save everyone, but you can change the ratios. Before you stood up with that gun, we were losing 50 men to take 1 bunker. After you stood up, we lost 2 men and took 5 bunkers. That's not perfect, but it's better. And in war, better is the best you can hope for. Harrison stood up, brushed the volcanic sand off his uniform. Tomorrow we push inland. The terrain changes. It's all caves and ridges up there, snipers in every shadow. This beach was just the welcome mat. The real fight is ahead of us. How long do you think this battle will last, sir? Intelligence says 2 weeks, but I think they're lying. This island will take a month, maybe more. The Japanese aren't going to give up. They'll fight from every cave, every hole, every inch of rock. He looked at Jack's stinger. How many rounds do you have left? About 300. And the gun, how much longer will it work? Jack examined the weapon. The barrel was discolored. The wells were cracked. The stock had a deep split running through the wood. It looked like it had been through a war, because it had. Maybe a few more fights, then it'll fall apart. Then make those fights count. Harrison started to walk away, then turned back. Mercer, I'm recommending you for a medal. I know that doesn't bring your friends back, but I want you to know that what you did today mattered. It saved lives. Remember that when the nightmare start. he disappeared into the darkness. The four remaining men sat in their crater as night fell completely. They could hear fighting in the distance, muttered gunfire, the occasional explosion. The Japanese were probing the American lines looking for weak points. "What do you think tomorrow brings?" Pete asked. "More of the same," Henry said. "More bunkers, more killing, more dying." "We should try to sleep," Red suggested. "We're going to need our strength." But none of them slept. They just sat there in the dark listening to the sounds of war, thinking about the men who weren't sitting with them anymore, thinking about home, thinking about whether they would ever see it again. Jack held the Stinger across his lap. Even in the darkness, he could feel the cracks in the stock, could feel the heat-warped barrel. The gun was dying, just like Danny, just like Marcus. Everything on this island was dying. But not yet. The gun still worked. And as long as it worked, Jack would use it, because that's what his father had taught him. A good tool doesn't quit until the job is done. And the job wasn't done. Not even close. The black sand beach of Iwo Jima stretched out behind them, covered in the shadows of the dead. Ahead of them, the volcanic ridges rose up like the broken teeth of some ancient monster. Somewhere up there, in caves and bunkers and spider holes, thousands of Japanese soldiers were waiting. Waiting for the Americans to come to them. Waiting to kill them. Waiting to die. Jack checked the Stinger one more time, ran his hand along the warped barrel, felt the cracked stock. The gun was a mess, a piece of junk held together by welds and hope. But it was his junk, and tomorrow he would use it again. Because that's what you do when you're fighting for your life on an island made of volcanic rock and death. You use whatever tool you have. You fight with whatever you've got. And you keep going until either the enemy breaks or you do. The night was long, the sulfur smell was overwhelming. The sounds of distant combat never stopped. Men cried in the darkness. Others prayed. Some just stared into space, their minds already broken by what they had seen. Jack sat with his back against the crater wall, the Stinger cradled in his arms like a child. He thought about Youngstown, about the steel mills, about his father teaching him to weld when he was 10 years old, about the principle that had guided his entire life. If the tool doesn't exist, create it. He had created the Stinger, and the Stinger had saved lives, but it had also cost lives. Marcus had died holding one. Danny had died fighting beside one. Was it worth it? Was the mathematics that Lieutenant Harrison talked about really that simple? 2 dead to save 200. Jack didn't know. He was just a toolmaker from Ohio. He wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a strategist. He was just a man with a gun trying to keep his friends alive in a place that seemed designed to kill them all. Tomorrow would bring more fighting, more death, more impossible decisions. But tonight he was alive. Red was alive. Pete was alive. Henry was alive. 4 out of 6. In the mathematics of war, that was probably as good as it got. Jack closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to rest them for a moment. The Stinger was heavy across his lap. The metal was still warm from the day's fighting. He could smell the burnt powder, the scorched oil, the scent of violence. And somewhere in the darkness and the volcanic ridges ahead, the enemy was waiting. The next 9 days blurred together into a continuous nightmare of volcanic rock gunfire and death. The Marines pushed inland from the beach, moving toward the airfields in the rocky ridges of northern Iwo Jima. The terrain changed from flat black sand to a maze of jagged stone, sulfur pits and caves. It was a sniper's paradise, a defender's dream, an attacker's hell. Jack became a specialist, a problem solver. When a patrol got pinned down by a machine gun nest hidden in the rocks, the call went out. Get Mercer. When a bunker refused to fall to grenades or flamethrowers, the radio crackled. We need the Stinger. When men were dying and nothing else worked, they sent for the toolmaker from Ohio with his homemade gun. On the second day, Jack cleared 8 spider holes. These were tiny camouflage pits where a single Japanese soldier would hide, pop up to shoot, then disappear. They were almost impossible to spot, almost impossible to kill. But the Stinger didn't need to see the enemy. It just needed to point in the general direction and pull the trigger. 20 rounds per second would saturate an area so thoroughly that nothing could survive. On the third day, Red took a bullet through the shoulder. The round went clean through without hitting bone or major arteries. He was lucky. The corpsman bandaged him up and told him to go to the rear for treatment. Red refused. He wrapped the wound tighter and kept fighting. He said he wasn't leaving Jack alone. On the fourth day, Pete's stinger finally died. The wells that held the stock to the receiver cracked completely. The gun literally fell apart in his hands. Pete sat in the volcanic ash and crud. Not because he was injured, because he had lost his weapon, the thing he and Danny had built together back in Hawaii. He felt like he had failed his dead friend. Jack helped him bury it. They scraped a shallow hole in the volcanic rock and placed the broken stinger inside. Pete said a few words. Then they covered it with stones and kept moving. There was no time for proper mourning. Not on Iwo Jima, but Pete didn't give up. That afternoon, when a wounded Marine needed to be carried back to the aid station under fire, Pete volunteered. He ran through a gauntlet of sniper fire, twice carrying wounded men on his back. By the end of the day, he had saved 3 lives. Danny would have been proud. On the 5th day, Henry's stinger overheated so badly that the barrel warped. The gun would still fire, but the bullets went everywhere except where you aimed. Henry tried to straighten the barrel by heating it and bending it back. It didn't work. He eventually gave up and switched to a standard bar. He hated it. Said it felt like trying to fight with one hand tied behind his back after using the stinger. By the 7th day, only 2 stingers remained functional, Jacks and Reds, and both were dying. The barrels were shot out. The receivers were cracked. The stocks were held together with wire and prayers. They looked like something pulled from a junkyard, which technically they were. On February 23rd, the American flag went up on Mount Suribachi. The Marines cheered. They thought the battle was won. They thought they could go home. Jack knew better. The flag was just a symbol, a morale boost. The real killing was still ahead. The Japanese had retreated into the northern caves, into the rocky ridges where they could fight from fortified positions, where they could kill Americans at a ratio of 10 to 1. The Stinger gave Jack's unit a better ratio, maybe 5 to 1, maybe 3 to 1 on a good day, but it was still a meat grinder. Men died, friends died. Kids who had never left their hometown before the war died on a volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Jack stopped sleeping. He would close his eyes for 2 or 3 hours and wake up screaming. The nightmares were always the same. Danny lying in the black sand, Marcus bleeding out with his chest torn open. His father's voice asking if he had done something that mattered. And Jack never had an answer. His feet were infected. The cuts from running barefoot had gotten into his bloodstream. The corpsman wrapped them in thick bandages and gave him sulfa powder. Told him he needed to rest. Let them heal. Jack nodded and kept walking. Rest meant other men died. He couldn't live with that. His right shoulder was swollen to twice its normal size. The constant recoil from the Stinger had torn the ligaments and muscles. Every time he fired the gun, it felt like someone was driving a railroad spike through his shoulder. The corpsman said the rotator cuff was destroyed, said Jack needed surgery, said he should be evacuated. Jack refused. Surgery meant leaving. Leaving meant abandoning his friends, abandoning the mission. His father hadn't raised him to quit when things got hard. The Stinger was in the same condition as its operator, held together by determination and nothing else. The barrel was black from carbon buildup. The receiver was cracked in 3 places. The stock had a split so deep you could see daylight through it. But it still fired. It still killed. That was enough. On the night of February 28th, 4 men sat in a foxhole carved into volcanic rock. Jack, Red, Pete, and Henry. They shared a can of cold beans and stale crackers. Nobody talked much. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said. Red broke the silence. Jack, your gun is going to fall apart. Tomorrow, maybe the day after. You know that, right? I know. We should request a replacement. Standard equipment, at least it won't explode. Standard equipment, it won't do what this does. This might kill you. Jack looked at his friend. Red's shoulder was bandaged. His face was gaunt from lack of food and sleep, but his eyes were still clear, still focused, still fighting. Everything on this island might kill me, Jack said. At least the Stinger gives us a chance. Henry spoke up. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. My family is in an internment camp in California. My parents, my sisters, they're locked up because of their race, because people think they're the enemy. He paused. I could have been angry, could have refused to serve, but I didn't. You know why? Nobody answered. Because being American isn't about where you're from. It's about what you do. It's about standing up when things are hard. It's about using whatever you have to make things better. He nodded at the stinger. That gun is the most American thing I've ever seen. It's broken. It's ugly. It shouldn't work. But it does. Because someone refused to accept that impossible means stop. Pete laughed bitterly. Danny would have loved that speech. He was always going on about the American dream, about how anyone could make it if they worked hard enough. Danny was right, Jack said. He made it. He built something that mattered. So did Marcus. They're not here, but their work is. Every time I pull this trigger, they're with me. They finished the beans in silence. Then they tried to sleep, tried and failed. The ground was too hard, the air was too cold, the memories were too fresh. Jack took out the letter he had written to his mother, the one he still hadn't sent. He read it again by moonlight. The words seemed inadequate now. How do you tell your mother that you're probably going to die? How do you explain that you chose to stay when you could have left? How do you make her understand that some things are worth dying for? He folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. He would mail it tomorrow. He would mail it. Or the day after. Or never. It didn't really matter. His mother would find out, one way or another, March 1st, 1945. Dawn came cold and gray. The mission briefing was short. Hill 362A. A strategic position in the Northern Highlands, honeycombed with caves, defended by an estimated 50 to 70 Japanese soldiers. Expected resistance, heavy. Expected casualties, high. Jack checked the stinger one last time. Loaded his last box magazine. 100 rounds. After this, he was out. There was no more ammunition for the aircraft gun. The supply sergeants didn't carry it. Once these 100 rounds were gone, the stinger became an expensive club. The patrol moved out at 0600 hours. 20 Marines plus Jack, Red, Pete, and Henry. They moved slowly through the rocky terrain. Every boulder could hide an enemy. Every shadow could conceal death. The silence was oppressive, unnatural. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. At 0815, the first shot rang out. A Marine at the front of the column dropped. Sniper. Nobody saw the muzzle flash. Nobody knew where it came from. The Japanese soldier had fired from a spider hole, then disappeared like a ghost. The patrol took cover, waited, scanned the rocks. Nothing. Just silence and volcanic stone. At 0847, another shot. Another Marine down. This one didn't die immediately. He screamed. The sound echoed off the rocks. The corpsman tried to reach him, but sniper fire drove him back. They had to listen to the wounded man scream for 20 minutes before he finally died. By 0930, they had lost 3 men and hadn't even seen the enemy. It was psychological warfare. The Japanese were picking them apart one shot at a time, making them afraid, making them hesitate, making them question whether moving forward was worth the cost. The lieutenant called a halt. They couldn't advance without taking more casualties. They couldn't retreat without abandoning the mission. They were stuck. That's when Jack spotted the cave complex. It was about 100 yards ahead, carved into the side of Hill 362A. Multiple entrances, multiple firing positions. A fortress built into the rock itself. That's where the snipers were operating from. That's where the enemy was hiding. The lieutenant looked at the cave, then at Jack. Can you suppress it? Jack looked at his stinger. 100 rounds. Maybe enough, maybe not. I can try. If you can keep their heads down for 30 seconds, we can get a flamethrower team up there. Burn them out, Jack nodded. He positioned himself behind a boulder. Red crouched beside him, ready to provide covering fire with his rifle. Pete and Henry spread out on the flanks. On your mark, the lieutenant said. Jack took a deep breath. His shoulder was screaming. His hands were shaking from exhaustion. The stinger felt heavier than it ever had before, but he had come too far to quit now, done too much to stop. He stepped out from behind the boulder, aimed at the cave entrance, and pulled the trigger for the last time. The sound was like the end of the world, a continuous roar that echoed across the volcanic landscape like thunder. 20 rounds per second poured into the darkness of the cave. Tracers ricocheted off the stone walls inside, creating a blender of lead and sparks. The noise was deafening. The fury was biblical. Jack held the trigger down. 3 seconds. 4. 5. He was going to empty the entire magazine, all 100 rounds, everything he had left. At 6 seconds, something broke. The stock snapped completely. The wooden grip shattered in Jack's hands. The recoil drove the metal receiver back into his shoulder with nothing to cushion it. Pain exploded through his injured rotator cuff. But he held on, kept his finger on the trigger, kept firing. 7 seconds. 8. The barrel was glowing white hot. Steam was rising from the receiver. The gun was literally cooking itself to death. 9 seconds. The magazine went dry. Click. The bolt locked back on an empty chamber. Silence fell like a hammer. Jack stumbled backward. The stinger fell from his hands. It hit the ground and the remains of the stock fell completely off. All that was left was the metal skeleton, the guts of the gun, no wood, no furniture, just the machinery of death. But the cave was silent, no more sniper fire. The flamethrower team rushed forward, sprayed liquid fire into the entrance. The screams from inside were brief and terrible. Then nothing. Mission accomplished. Jack sat down hard on a rock. His shoulder was on fire. His hands were blistered from the heat of the gun. His ears were ringing so badly he couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched whine. But it was done. The stinger had fired its last round, had killed its last enemy, had saved its last life. Red ran over. His mouth was moving, but Jack couldn't hear him. Red grabbed his shoulders, shook him gently. Jack's hearing started to come back. "Okay, Jack. Are you okay?" "Yeah," Jack managed. "I'm okay. Gun's dead, though." "Screw the gun. You did it. Cave's clear. We can advance." Pete and Henry appeared. They were smiling. Actual smiles for the first time in days. The mission was a success. They had taken the objective. They had survived. Jack tried to smile back, tried to feel the relief they were feeling. But all he felt was empty, hollow, like something vital had been burned out of him along with those last 100 rounds. He looked at the stinger lying in the volcanic dust. Just a piece of metal now, no stock, no magazine, no purpose. It looked like garbage, which is what it had always been. Garbage that he had turned into something useful. Garbage that had saved 200 lives. Garbage that had cost him 2 friends. "We should head back," the lieutenant said. "Hill 362A is secure. Mission complete." Jack started to stand up. That's when he heard it. A single shot. From far away, maybe 200 yards. A Japanese sniper who had been hiding in a different cave. One last soldier who hadn't retreated, who had waited for his moment. The bullet hit Jack in the chest. He felt it punch through his rib cage, felt it tear through his lung, felt the hot spreading wetness as blood filled his chest cavity. He looked down and saw red blooming across his uniform like a terrible flower. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees, then onto his side. The volcanic rock was cold against his face. That seemed strange. Everything else was hot. The blood was hot. The pain was hot. But the rock was cold. Red was there immediately, rolling him over, pressing hands against the wound, screaming for a corpsman. Pete and Henry appeared. Their faces were white, shocked. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had won. The mission was over. Jack tried to speak, but blood came out instead of words. He coughed. More blood. His lung was filling up, drowning him from the inside. The corpsman arrived, took one look at the wound, and his face told the whole story. This wasn't something you could bandage. This wasn't something sulfa powder could fix. This was a sucking chest wound. Fatal. Just a matter of time. Red grabbed Jack's hand, squeezed it hard. "Stay with us. You're going to be okay. The corpsman's going to patch you up." But Jack knew better. He had seen enough men die to know what it looked like. He was dying. Right here on this volcanic rock. 23 years old. A toolmaker from Ohio who had tried to build something that mattered. He managed to form words. They came out wet and gurgling. "Red, take care of the stinger. Forget the gun. Just hold on. Tell them it worked. It worked. You were right. Now stop talking and save your strength." Jack smiled, or tried to. It was hard to tell with all the blood. "Danny, Marcus, tell them I'm sorry. They know. They're proud of you. My father, I did it. I did something that mattered. Red was crying now, tears cutting clean lines through the volcanic dust on his face. You did. You saved us all. Jack's vision was getting dark around the edges. The pain was fading. That was probably bad. It meant his body was shutting down, going into shock, preparing for the end. He thought about Youngstown, about the steel mills, about his father teaching him to weld when he was 10 years old, about the principle that had guided his life. If the tool doesn't exist, create it. He had created the stinger, and it had worked. It had saved lives. That had to count for something. That had to be enough. The last thing Jack Mercer saw was Red's face above him. The last thing he heard was his friend's voice telling him he was a hero. The last thing he felt was the cold volcanic rock beneath him. Then nothing. Time of death, 1,047 hours, March 1st, 1945. Corporal Jack Mercer, United States Marine Corps, 23 years old, toolmaker, innovator, brother in arms, gone. Red, Pete, and Henry sat with the body for 10 minutes. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They just sat there in the volcanic dust. 3 men who had started this war with 5 brothers and were now down to 3. The sergeant came over, told them they had to move, had to keep pushing. The battle wasn't over. There were still Japanese soldiers in the caves, still positions to take, still a war to win. Red picked up the broken stinger, just the metal skeleton. No stock, no magazine, just the receiver and the barrel. He wrapped it in canvas and tied it to his pack. "What are you doing?" the sergeant asked. "Taking it home for Jack." "It's just scrap metal." "No," Red said quietly. "It's proof." Then Red did something else. He reached into Jack's pocket and pulled out the letter, the one Jack had written to his mother but never sent. Red looked at it for a moment, then carefully folded it and put it in his own pocket. "I'll make sure she gets this," Red said to Jack's body. "I promise." They moved out, left Jack's body for the grave's registration team. There was no time for a burial, no time for a ceremony. The body would be tagged and bagged and shipped home in a flag-draped coffin. Just another statistic in a war full of statistics. March 26, 1945. Iwo Jima was declared secure. 36 days of fighting. 26,000 American casualties. 6,800 killed in action. The bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. Red, Pete, and Henry survived. They shipped out on a transport back to Hawaii, then eventually home to the United States. They never talked about the stingers. It hurt too much. Danny was dead. Marcus was dead. Jack was dead. Half their brotherhood was gone. Red kept his promise. He brought Jack's stinger home to Boston, kept it in a closet in his apartment. His wife asked him once why he kept a piece of rusty metal. He told her it was the reason he came home alive. She didn't understand. She couldn't. You had to be there. Red also kept his other promise. He mailed Jack's letter to his mother. Mrs. Mercer received it 3 weeks after the telegram informing her of Jack's death. She kept it with her for the rest of her life, reading it whenever she missed her son, which was every day. In 1946, Jack's mother received a posthumous Medal of Honor in his name. The citation talked about conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life. It described the stinger and the 8 runs across the beach. It made him sound like a superhero. Red attended the ceremony. He wanted to tell Jack's mother the truth, that her son was just a toolmaker who refused to accept that impossible meant stop. But he didn't know how to put it into words. In the 1950s, historians began questioning the stinger story. No examples of the weapon existed. No photographs. No physical evidence. Some said it was exaggerated, a war story that had grown in the telling. They said it was impossible to fire an aircraft machine gun from the shoulder. Impossible to run a beach 8 times under fire. Impossible for one man to make that much difference. Red wrote letters to the Marine Corps Historical Division. Tried to explain that he had been there, that he had seen it, that Jack Mercer was real and the stinger was real, and the 200 lives saved were real. But without evidence, it was just an old man's memory. And memories fade. Memories lie. Memories turn into myths. By 1992, Red was 69 years old, retired, living alone in a small house outside Boston. Pete had died of cancer in 1985. Henry had died of a heart attack in 1990. Red was the last one left, the last man who had seen the stinger work, the last witness to what Jack had done. That's when he got the phone call from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. They had found something, a box of photographs from Iwo Jima, combat photography that had never been published, never been cataloged, just sitting in storage for almost 50 years. One of the photographs showed 6 Marines standing together in Hawaii, February 15, 1945, 4 days before D-Day. They were holding strange-looking weapons, guns with M1 Garand stocks, Browning automatic rifle bipods, homemade box magazines. The photograph showed Jack Mercer, Danny Kowalski, Marcus Washington, Frank Sullivan, Pete Donnelly, Henry Chen, all 6 men, all 6 stingers, the proof that Red had been waiting for, the evidence that it had all been real. The photograph was published in Marine Corps Gazette in 1993. The headline read, "The Stinger was real." Gun collectors who had called it impossible apologized. Historians who had questioned the story retracted their doubts. The legend became fact. In 2003, 10 years after the photograph was published, a curator at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia made another discovery. Deep in the storage archives in a box labeled Unknown Artifacts, Iwo Jima, he found a piece of wood, a rifle stock with metal welded to one end. The tag said Unknown Origin, 1945. When they analyzed it, they found that the metal was from an AN/M2 aircraft machine gun receiver. The wood was from an M1 Garand rifle. The weld matched the description of the Stinger. It was a fragment of Jack's gun, the piece that Red had brought home and donated to the museum in 1985, a few months before Pete died. He had donated it anonymously, not wanting attention, just wanting to make sure that some piece of the Stinger survived. The fragment was placed on display, a small piece of wood and metal that represented something larger: innovation, courage, the refusal to accept defeat, the American way of solving problems. When the tools don't work, build new ones. The display plaque told the story. Corporal Jack Mercer, the Stinger, Iwo Jima, February 1945, 8 runs across the beach, 5 pillboxes destroyed, 200 lives saved, 2 friends lost, 1 man who refused to quit. Visitors to the museum would stop and look at the fragment. Some of them were veterans, some were historians, some were just people interested in military history. They would read the plaque, look at the photograph, touch the glass case gently, and they would understand. This wasn't just about a gun. It was about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept ordinary solutions. It was about the tool maker who looked at a pile of airplane scrap and saw hope, about the Marine who ran into fire 8 times because nobody else would, about the American who proved that one person with an idea can change everything. The legacy of the Stinger didn't end on Iwo Jima. The concept lived on. The idea that volume of fire matters more than precision. That suppression creates opportunity. That speed kills. Modern weapons took the lesson. The M249 squad automatic weapon, the M134 minigun. Every high rate of fire infantry weapon owes something to Jack's experiment in the Hawaiian scrapyard. The military doctrine changed. Suppressive fire became standard tactics. What Jack had improvised became official. But the real legacy wasn't the guns. It was the principle. Adapt, improvise, overcomes. The unofficial motto of the Marine Corps, the philosophy that had driven Jack Mercer to build something impossible. Red Sullivan died in 2010 at the age of 87. He was buried in a veteran cemetery outside Boston. At his funeral, they played taps and fired a 21-gun salute. 3 Marines folded the flag from his coffin and presented it to his daughter. In his will, he had left instructions. He wanted to be buried near his brothers if possible. The Marine Corps made it happen. They transferred Pete's and Henry's remains to the same cemetery. 3 graves in a row, 3 men who had built 6 guns and changed the course of a battle. There was a 4th grave nearby. Jack Mercer had been buried in his hometown of Youngstown, Ohio in 1945, but the cemetery put up a memorial stone in Boston, a marker that said, "In memory of Corporal Jack Mercer, builder of the Stinger, brother in arms." He refused to accept that impossible means stop. Today, if you visit the National Cemetery in Youngstown, you can find Jack's grave. It's a simple headstone. Just his name, his dates, and the words Medal of Honor. No mention of the stinger, no description of what he did, just the basic facts. But if you know the story, you can see more. You can imagine a young man from a steel town who learned to work with metal from his father, who joined the Marines to do something that mattered, who built a weapon from garbage because the standard tools weren't enough, who ran into fire 8 times to feed that weapon, who saved 200 lives and lost his own in the process. The stinger is gone. All 6 guns destroyed or lost. Only that one fragment remains sitting in a museum case in Virginia, a piece of wood with metal welded to it. It doesn't look like much. It looks like junk. But it's not junk. It's proof that the greatest weapon in the American arsenal isn't technology. It's not firepower. It's not even courage. It's ingenuity. It's the refusal to accept that problems can't be solved. It's the mindset that says when they tell you it's impossible, you prove them wrong. They called his machine gun junk. They said it would never work. They ordered him to throw it away. But on a black sand beach in February 1945, that junk saved 200 American lives. Jack Mercer didn't survive Iwo Jima, but the stinger did. Not as metal and wood, but as proof that one person can make a difference. That innovation matters more than regulations. That sometimes the best way forward is the one you build yourself. This is the story of the stinger. This is the story of the toolmaker who became a warrior. This is the story of an American who looked at a pile of scrap metal and saw hope. And every word of it is true. If you served during World War II, or if your father or grandfather fought in the Pacific, we want to hear from you. Share your stories in the comments below. Tell us about the men who didn't come home. Tell us about the improvised solutions and the impossible odds. Tell us about the generation that refused to quit. Because these stories matter. These men matter. And the lessons they taught us about courage and innovation and doing whatever it takes to protect your brothers in arms, those lessons are timeless. Don't let these stories die with the generation that lived them. Share them. Remember them. Honor them. That's what Jack Mercer would have wanted. Not a statue or a parade. Just the knowledge that his work mattered. That the tool he built saved lives. That his refusal to accept impossible made a difference. The stinger was junk, but it was American junk. And that made all the difference.